Looking at that in the book, we can see with the two different basketball players, Kareem and Michael Jordan, we've confirmed that Michael Jordan's performance in 1986 with a point scored of 408 for the whole season is an outlier. We confirmed that in Part C. And we look down here in Part D, we can see that Jordan had an injury in 1986. If you ignore his performance for that year, how would you change your answers to Part A and Part B? This is a bigger question with outliers. If there's a reason why a number is an outlier and it doesn't make sense to keep it in, for example, he had an injury that year can't really be counted against him in terms of his overall performance for his whole career, unless you really want it to. That's always an argument. But in this case, let's not. So Jordan had an injury. If we take that out, what's going to happen to, in Part A, the mean, and in Part B, we compared the interquartile range versus the standard deviation. Interquartile range was better in Part B because there was an outlier. And since the standard deviation is based on the mean, which is sensitive to outliers, you can't really use it if you have an outlier. But we've solved that problem in Part D by taking out the outlier, which means now we should compare standard deviations between Kareem and Michael Jordan in order to see which one is more consistent. Let's take a look at some of those actual numbers again in this data analysis window. If I take out Michael Jordan's injury year, take out that 408, which you can also do it exactly the same way on your calculator. You just highlight the value that you want to delete, and you delete it. When you look at the statistics for this, or let's look at histograms first, side-by-side histograms, or rather over-under, for these data. Now you should be able to see that Kareem's data is a bit more spread out. In other words, the middle two-thirds, which is what the standard deviation is looking at, the middle two-thirds around the mean is more spread out for Kareem than it is for Michael Jordan now. Looking at the actual numbers that go along with that, and again, we're looking at the standard deviation. Let me look at both of these side by side, and you can do the exact same thing on your calculator by using the 1var stats. The mean number for Kareem is now clearly lower than Michael Jordan's mean. When we took out that outlier of 408, Michael Jordan's mean jumped from 2375 up to 2656. When you add them all together and you divide by how many you have, this case it's 7, not 8 like we had before, you get a different mean, and it's much higher now than Kareem's. Before it was a little bit higher, now it's much higher. And then the standard deviations is what we're comparing now. The sample standard deviation for Kareem is still the same at 271, but now Michael Jordan's, instead of being 829, which is what it was before, and that determines how spread out the middle two-thirds of the values are, now it's down to just 255. So Michael Jordan has a higher average, mean, and a lower standard deviation, which means he's more consistent. On average, he scores higher, and he's more consistent about it. So that would pretty much define him as the better player overall. That was the end of Part D, and this is the end of page 132, problem number 6. Thank you very much.